I'm Abby Benson, and I'm the Field Production Coordinator at Featherstone.
I'm Jack Cadine, I'm Featherstone Farmer. My wife and I started in mid-90s, 1994, 95. We were founding members of a land co-op in about 8 miles north of here. At that time we had nothing. And we bought with the 6 of us, bought the cheapest, $400 an acre. You get what you pay for in farmland. And we had that same Waukegan, about 12 inches deep, but below it, if I dug, I remember going out there, I'd worked on farms for 6 years and I thought I knew what I was doing. I dug that hole 12 inches deep. Yeah, this is where we're gonna farm. If I had gone down 2 more inches and hit the yellow clay, you know, and really thought about what that meant, you know, so one of my things for young people getting started is think about what you're about to get into, and there's such a difference between even B soil and B conditions and the A plus or the A or the A plus. That's going to be the difference between making a living and not making a living. We started out on D minus ground up there and really struggled, and 5 acres of this rented ground with my wife and my brother. Right away we realized the limitations of this low wet site, poorly drained, poor air drainage. We started renting land on ridge tops. That worked out pretty well. We started renting land. Then we realized we needed, you know, not just clay subsoil ridge or wet, poorly drained valley ground, but we needed lighter ground. So we started looking around for sand, you know, or light, you know, in my mind that was sand on the surface. So we started asking bigger growers, where do we find sand? And they said, well, there's this field right up west of Rushford, and in probably 2003 or 4, we started renting a field about half a mile north of here, lighter, sandier ground, traveling 7 miles from the original spot because we realized the limitations of a poor site. Even as we were growing, like I say, 12-15% every year, farmers markets, the co-ops, the CSA growing, started with 20 members. We needed more dependable, less risky, less stressful growing conditions. So then in 2007 we had this one signal event, which was acute with that weather, flooding, you know, where we lost pretty much everything, August 20th, 2007. And we were on this field already planting in this, right, at that time. And so after about a month, it took about 6 weeks to realize, wow, we're not going to shut this thing down. We might actually survive. We might actually have another season of vegetables. And it was another 6 weeks after that I realized, well, it's obvious. The only way this is going to work is if we move the whole thing down here. Because we're in D minus up there, you know, D minus conditions, you know, and here we have, you know, I didn't really understand that what we really want is black dirt on top of sand. Here we were farming sand, but you could see the potential. And only in the last few years when we stabilized, less ground, farmed more intensively, more deliberately, you know, retaining people to be able to build on success, learning stuff, not making the same mistakes over and over again, fewer acres, fewer sites, better managed. Now we're in a better spot. We're managing about 250 acres on the ridge and in the valley. And producing about 140 acres of vegetable crop in a given year. On the revenue and the acreage side, the 5 big ones are storage carrots, winter storage carrots, cabbage and winter storage cabbage, kale. Fresh market kale is really a big one. I think is nearly $200,000 crop. Winter squash. And those are the really big. Those are the, you know, the ones that are in the $150,000 to $250,000 a piece crops. You know, when we started, and this is, you know, if you're a young farmer, if you're thinking about what you want to grow and so forth, I wish I had someone to explain to me at one point. You know, you can grow 2 types of things in Minnesota. You can grow things that are for fresh market that you grow and pick and sell within a week. Okay. And these are largely fruiting crops or things that are like broccoli that I consider extremely volatile, hard, risky, okay? Or you can grow the storage crops, Okay, where instead of 3 days to pick it when a tomato ripens, you've got 3 weeks. When in the late autumn, in October, the cabbage, there might be 3 weeks where you could pick that cabbage where it's still pretty optimal. Well, the carrots can sit in the ground an extra week or 10 days. And then instead of having to sell it in 2 days or 5 days, you've got 2 or 5 months to sell it if you've got the right storage. A fair amount of our ground is up on the ridge, and when Nick was here one year, I'll never forget this. We were standing on a field right about 3 miles from here, on the high ridge, and asking Nick, what intuitively to me we're farming, subsoil. Okay, where did the topsoil, how much topsoil was here? And he gave me a very scientific evidence, an answer, long explanation based on studies that he had done in other parts of the state, and radio, carbon analysis, and when these different gradients were laid down, and this or that or the other. But at the end of it, he said, I think it's reasonable to conclude that the soil level here may have been between 2 and 3 meters higher at the time of first plowing.
Down here or up there?
On the ridge. 3 meters of topsoil gone since the first Norwegians showed up. Yeah. It just takes your breath away to think about what has gone on in agriculture, what we have lost here. So what we're farming up there, is the remains, is the dregs of it.
The closest thing to a philosophy that we have, I suppose, is just that we try to keep things covered as much as possible, just to keep roots in the soil and to keep the biology alive and thriving, and breaking down organic matter and all of that. If we try to get in a legume when we can to add nitrogen on fields where we're going to need to till them early in the spring, I will try to plan in oats and peas as the cover crop. So that's why there are fields right now that we're working on getting prepped today, so we can try to seed them so we get some growth on those before it gets too cold. So for something where I know I'm going to want it earliest, spring lettuces, parsley, maybe the first kale, but maybe the first sweet corn, we'll do the oats and peas so that we get a legume in there, we have winter cover, but it will die. So I don't have to worry about trying to kill it in the spring before the early plants go in.
How much growth do you get in the fall before it winter kills?
It totally depends. We will push these until pretty late, and Jack often is pushing me to put in like rye and vetch, or rye especially later, because that'll come up in the spring, and we may let that grow until June or July. So we will seed things up as late as we can, even if we don't get any growth, knowing that it'll come up in the spring and we'll have the cover that we want. Right now, with just the 2 tunnels, last winter was the first, we barely had them built in time for winter spinach. So we planted spinach in them, and then we demoed all of that and planted tomatoes. Yeah. And now we're about to rip out these beautiful tomato plants to do spinach. Yeah. The spinach plants are growing now. But the goal is that we're going to build more tunnels. Okay. So once we have more tunnels, I think the idea would be that we could do more of that. But right now we have been wall to wall spinach, tomato, spinach. But it's possible we're going to double the size of that one, and Jack wants to fill this field with tunnels, so yeah.
If you're trying to grow high value vegetable crops that are expensive to produce in the greenhouse, that have a high market value but that are high risk because of all these different factors, if you're growing these kinds of high value crops, in my opinion, you need to have a really, really, really good seed bed for those crops, even transplanted. And for something direct seeded like carrots or beets, sweet corn, it needs to be, if the carrots need to be 1/8 of an inch in the ground in order to get them to emerge and produce the nice stand that is worth weeding and worth cultivating, worth irrigating and worth harvesting, all of it, you're automatically talking about, in my opinion anyway, you're talking about very invasive tillage. Really invasive, really hard on the ground, and burning up organic matter, because for a carrot bed, if we're going to be planting those carrots on July 1st, we're coming out of a really nice thick rye vetch cover crop, from the previous year, thick, that we chop and incorporate, but we're coming through there with a chisel plow or the offset disc that you saw here to kill that cover crop in May 10th. And then we're drying that cover crop down, and we're getting it, and then we're either subsoiling or we're doing it. Sometimes we have to chisel plow more than once, because to kill that cover crop off, you're going over the offset disc, and that creates compaction. You get 2 inches of rain on it, and then next thing you know, you've got weed pressure in there. You have to chisel plow a second time, although you don't want to. And then we go through and you're finished disking to level it to the place where you can press beds, like you've seen with the 2600, not laying plastic but pressing a flat bed. And that gets it pretty good, but then you have to use a very shallow rotivation to go across the surface of it to get that to a place, not billiard table, but as close in Minnesota as you can get. You see the way. What's that?
How many passes do you?
Oh, we press, and we would press it once and then rotivate one time. That's all you would need typically. But then you go through multiple passes of stale bedding with the shallow cultivator, the budding baskets, to disturb 2 or 3 flushes of weeds before you even consider putting that carrot seed in the ground. And every one of those disturbs the bed. And that bed that in California is like this, squared, and you can put a tape measure on it, and you can put a level on it. It's a laser leveled field, and the carrots are going in exactly 1/8 inch in the ground. Now our beds are looking like this, and they're wonky and they're off, but they're still close enough that we can still get a pretty good stand of carrots. But that's many, many passes. But I would say that when we get off of there have been times when we've been off of the cover cropping, or we've had more weeds in fields, or we've had more compaction. We definitely notice the downside if we don't do the positive. We notice it, a 2-year effect of compaction or other things, and less tilth, less productivity. We see downsides. Yeah, well, it is. It's all trade-offs. There's no doubt about it. And some of it I feel really good about, just because I know that we're doing the right things with organic matter and with soil health. Other things, with the petroleum use and the compaction and the equipment and all that, there's no way to justify it other than it's somewhat better to grow it here in Minnesota with these conditions than to grow it in California with the same kinds of issues, because that's the trade-off. But it's all. I would never consider what we do here to be truly sustainable in any way. The petrol, the resource, the sulfur from Indonesia. I just think it is an incremental step in the right direction. But we've had to make a lot of compromises because of the scale, but also just the desire to be consistent producers for local markets, and to really make good on this idea of having broccoli most weeks from September 1 through November 1 for many stores on a big scale, to where people can buy it from here and not from Salinas. But we've had to make compromises, and a lot of them have to do with plastic mulch in the field, which is all about hedging against too much or too little moisture, both. That little, 28 to 30 inch wide by 8 inch high plastic covered root zone, is all the difference in certain cases with surplus moisture or with reduced moisture. Think about covered production, where you have more control, frankly, over what's going on, because both the acute and chronic rain events, this is what it's all about. It's acute and chronic rain both. They're equally destructive. They're more and more and more common with destabilized climate. And without either ground plastic or covered plastic, we would not be here. And I just cannot imagine there would be a vegetable industry in Minnesota in 20 years without plastic. I'm that cynical at this time in this day and age. I hate to say it.
This year, a year like this makes me think that we have it figured out, but it's been a very dry year, so the disease has been totally fine this year. And I think one thing that we've learned since we had that awful year in 2016 with the black rot is that we will not get rid of it. It's something that we will continue to live with, and sometimes it'll be worse, in some places it'll be worse, but I think we're more finding ways to keep it from being a catastrophic situation when we do have black rot on the farm. And so one of the main pieces that Jack likes to speak to is when we went back to working with Bob, the consultant, about mineralizing the soil. So that has kind of been one of the foundations of what we've been trying to do, is just getting our soils more in balance, so that, I mean, I'm not a soil scientist. I can't begin to speak to all of the details of it, I guess, but just having our soils as healthy as possible so that the plants are as healthy as possible. When the bacteria are healthy and breaking down organic matter, and then healthier plants lead to plants with better immune systems that are less likely to get sick. Yeah, so soil is one part, and so that is one part. I think it's an important part, but once again, soil is very mysterious to me, and like the mineralizing and balancing of the soils is a many-year process. So we started, and it's very, very expensive. So we started doing these mineral recommendations ahead of brassica crops. So now, this is year 5 probably. The brassica crops are now coming back around in the rotation to being planted in fields that we started mineralizing back when we started doing this, and they still needed to be tweaked. But presumably, as time goes on, things are going to balance out, and we will have to add less. So the soil is part of it, but then I think that cultural practices other than soil stuff are, I think, as important probably. So I started hot water treating a lot of the brassica seeds after that really bad year. I don't necessarily do stuff that comes from, there are certain seed companies that do a really good job, and they list that protocol like in their, when you buy the seed. Bejo out of I think the Netherlands, for one, like they have very good protocol, and I don't worry about hot water treating theirs, because they test them all. So that's one. A lot of things I set up in 8 blocks, so 8 beds and then a road, 8 beds and then a road, which has taken out a lot of ground out of production, definitely, but it, like, specifically for kale and cabbage, so then we don't ever have to drive the tractor in the field when the plants are big and bushy. We still cultivate, but a big thing is for spraying. Like if we're spraying for worms, we always have a lane. Or harvesters, they always have a lane that they can drive on, because the main thing is just trying not to move through and touch the plants when they're wet. That's the biggest thing that we're avoiding with that. So same with, once again, it's hard for harvest and for weeding, but we try not to do those jobs when those plants are wet, because if one has any pathogens on it, you just spread it through the entire field. So that's the big one, trying not to move through the fields when they're wet.
We're working with a neighbor who's got cattle and sheep. Okay, right now he's been doing in these. So what do you do with the other 90 acres or 110 acres or whatever it is, Abby, whatever it is, between with the management and the vegetable crop? What do you do with those other acres? So we're working with people that are doing small grains or forage. Okay, but now we're pushing this guy to bring livestock onto these vegetable fields. Okay, this is our first year experiment with it, with about 6 acres, where we're taking out for 3 years one of these horribly degraded fields on the ridge, and him bringing, you know, first year alfalfa baling, getting us, or mixed hay with alfalfa establishing, and the next year he's going to have cattle in there for the next 2 years. Okay, and then we'll really, that would be an interesting one to see, you know, what 3 years, okay, coming out of heavy cabbage crop off of there. Okay, the fall of that year, or maybe it was the spring, we seeded in. Oh, it probably would have been in oats and mixed hay the following spring, followed by baling that year, and then bringing in the baling off the oats, and then grazing the hay out of there for 2 full seasons, and then plow down at the end of that, and then coming in with probably kale the 4th year.